So it so happened that this month I released my book, and this is the first month where we wanted to do a SoPE meeting on this side of the bay. So we usually meet in San Mateo because we belong to the San Mateo County Medical Association. So thank you very much for coming. My name is Chettipally, and here are some things I do. By the way, as of January 31st, I retired from Kaiser. I'm an emergency physician. Thank you. Yes, I survived. Kaiser is a great program for physicians, so I really loved it. I also teach medical students at UCSF, and I run the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs in the Bay Area. What I'm going to talk about is all about what I think is the right thing. It doesn't represent any organization. Okay, so the first quote, 50% of what we do in U.S. clinical practice is unnecessary, ineffective, and sometimes dangerous. And that's just my statement. And some of you are looking at that number and they are saying, shaking their head. There's no way that is true. Some of you are thinking, there's no way that number is true. He couldn't have had 26 years of experience. He looks so young, right? But again, with my work at Kaiser, I've been an emergency physician for about 26 years, and for the last 10 years, I also am the co-founder of a research group called CREST Network. What we did, about 13, 14 physician scientists got together, and we started doing large studies within the emergency department. So I was the technology leader for that group. And that's my claim to fame, and that's where I learned most of the stuff that at least some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. So if you look at U.S. healthcare, why is the cost going up? I'm going to talk about a few things here. One of them is the population is aging, right? As the population gets older, the cost of care goes up, right? For a 30-year-old, it costs about $5,000. When you get to 65, it costs $20,000 to take care of that person. And most industrialized countries have seen this, where the younger population is decreasing and the older population is increasing. And so if you look at the graph on the left or on the right, you see that it becomes more cylindrical rather than a triangle. U.S. spends a lot of money on healthcare. So this is a graph of all the world economies. The first line obviously is USA, and then China, Japan, and then Germany. The cost of U.S. healthcare is as big as the whole economy of Germany. It's a big, big chunk. And why is that important? Well, one of the things that has been happening is that the price has been going up. This is the consumer price index. And obviously the top line up there is healthcare. Everything else remained kind of stable. The bottom line, I think, is clothing. Clothing actually went down. It became cheaper. Housing, food, everything kind of. Education is another thing, yes. But healthcare is obviously the big outlier here. And we'll look at some of those things. This graph looks at, what are the pieces of this cost of healthcare? So the big chunk is hospital care. 38% is hospital care. 23% is physician and clinical services. Only a small percentage goes to the physicians. A big chunk of that is the support services that have to be there to support the physician's clinical practice. Tom talked about that, what all this other stuff that has to be done to support the physicians. So those are the big chunks. We'll come back and see why that's a problem. You would think, we are spending so much money, so our performance should be great. But we are very low on performance and pretty high on spending when you compare it with other developed countries. It's not that we lack knowledge. We do a lot of clinical studies, and the number of studies keeps going up and up. The most important reason why we use electronic health records now, or why physicians are being forced to use electronic health records, is these three reasons. The first reason is reimbursement. We want to bill the insurance companies, right? So we have to capture that data to be able to show to the insurance company why we need to get paid for this service. Regulatory agencies, they are looking at very closely on how medicine is practiced, how things are done, and so you have to check a lot of boxes for that. And the third big reason is that there's a big pressure on physicians to document, mainly for medical legal reasons. So just imagine, if we just take these three things off, well, clinical practice actually can be fun. But the EMR, EHR companies are mostly focused on this, and that's the reason why it has become such a big pain for the physicians. There is a 50%, more than 50% burnout as reported by physicians. And one of the reasons is that this data collection, this EHR usage is implicated with one of the reasons for this burnout. Actually, the problem may be much deeper than that, which is the business model of healthcare. And the reason for that, the reason why I say that is, if healthcare is run like a factory where you're making units, right, and you get paid based on the number of units. That's why it's called, producers. They make things. But in reality, healthcare is not like that. It's a lot of intellectual work that is involved. There's a lot of caring that has to happen. And so compensating physicians based on the units is not an ideal situation, because the insurance companies and the payers, they'll keep pushing on the unit price. And so if the price goes down, you got to do more units. And that's where the biggest problem, I think, is for the burnout, physician burnout. Well, we've been looking at EHR data for a long time. At Kaiser Permanente, we did, I think, around 2005, 2006. We went paperless. And so the data availability, is there. There's a lot of data in the EHRs. The hardware's, technology is improving, the speeds are increasing, and there's a lot of growth in the key algorithms. If you look at, healthcare delivery, there are only two main players. As Thomas said in the first presentation, it's the physicians and the patients. But there's so much stuff that gets in between these two key players. Everybody has a piece of this this transaction. Everybody wants to insert themselves in this transaction. And they keep pushing it in different directions, right? Pharma, medical devices, they want to sell their things. Academia, they just want to publish stuff. Regulators want to enforce things. Malpractice attorneys are there looking for a piece of this. Of course, insurance companies, what they do, they just raise the rates. But if you think about these two key players, what is the most important thing that a physician needs to know and that a patient needs to know? Its bottom line is that clinical knowledge. Also, the business model I talked about value-based care versus volume-based care. If you are in volume-based care, eventually you'll get tired of doing that because you're running faster and faster and faster just to keep up that income. In volume-based care, you get, this is for the people that are not in healthcare that want to know about what value-based care versus volume-based care. In volume-based care, you want sick people so that the more sick people there are, the more money you'll make, right? In value-based care, it's the opposite, which is if you keep your patients healthy, then you make money. Otherwise, you lose money if your patients get sick. And that's where the biggest dilemma comes for physicians. Do we keep the patients healthy? Do we prevent illnesses? Do we keep them out of the hospital? Do we keep them out of the clinic? So if you look at the risk and how it starts from the womb to home versus hospital, if you take care of a problem more on the left side, it's probably cheaper than more on the right side, right? Hospital, we've seen that hospital costs are pretty high, very expensive. And by the time a patient ends up in the hospital, that means that it's the failure of the healthcare system because the patient ended up being sick. They were not able to keep them out of the hospital, not able to keep them healthy, not able to prevent a lot of the chronic diseases, which are 80% preventable. So what happens is that as you move the care to the home, we've seen a presentation from Rachna, where they're trying to move the care into the home where the cost decreases. So the more to the left you move, the less the cost and less disease. Another big change is happening, and that is how data science is informing the research. The scientific method is, you have a research question, so you go and collect a sample of patient data, and then you analyze it, and then you come up with an answer. And you can use that answer to apply to the bigger population, and then you have a solution. But now that we have a lot of data on all of these patients, in Kaiser we can study 11 million patients. This whole data, all you have to do is come up with a question, and there is enough technology to find that answer. Isn't that great? I mean, we never had this situation ever in the history of humankind. So the bottom line is you have to understand healthcare as an information science. The sooner you realize that, the more lives we can save, the more costs we can bring down. So normally they say it takes 18 years for knowledge to come back and to be used in practice. Because, all these researchers, they come up with research questions, they apply for a grant, and then they get the grant, and then they do the study, and there'll be multiple studies, and then the associations and the bodies, the physician bodies and the science bodies, they look at the data and say, oh, okay, this is good evidence, and then they put it into a guideline, and the guidelines get disseminated to the doctors, and the doctors have to use it in their practice. By the time the doctors learn, and actually when it comes to the bedside, it takes a long time. Well, if you have all the data, and if you have the technology, maybe you can answer it in much shorter time. The same question, you can ask that to the data, and you can get that in a very short period. If Google can do it, we can do it too. So a little bit of what my work involved at Kaiser. So emergency department is a very interesting space. It is right in the middle of outpatient and inpatient. So it becomes a gateway. It also has a lot of input from the community, the fire department, the ambulances, the nursing homes, the clinics, the urgent cares. And then on the other side, you have the hospital, you have the operating room, you have the ICUs, you have all these procedure specialists that you're dealing with. So it is right in the middle of the healthcare transaction. You see patients from all kinds of, with all kinds of diseases, right? Starting with colds, maybe a little nick here, to all the way to heart attacks, pulmonary embolism, strokes. People die, right? So you have a full range of disease processes happening. So one of the things that we started doing was, okay, we have all this electronic health record data for the past, we started in 2010. So we had at least 5 years worth of data on all our patients, right? So what are the things we are seeing? How do you describe? What are the various entities that we are seeing? So that was our first question. And so that is called descriptive analytics. So you can look at the data from the past and figure that out. But then more interesting things happen, which is, can you predict what's going to happen to this patient? If you're seeing a patient with chest pain, can you predict if this is going to end up as a heart attack? Well, in fact, we can. How did we do that? We looked at 100,000 patients with chest pains that come through our departments. By the way, we see about more than 1 million patients a year coming through our 21 emergency departments, and they're all on one system. And so you can go back a couple of years and you can collect a lot of data on these patients and look at the variables in their history, in their medications, in their past encounters, in their past tests. What kind of symptoms do they come in with? Do they have shortness of breath? Do they have sweating? Is the pain on the right side or the left side? You can look at the vital signs when they're taken in the emergency department, compare it with the previous vital signs. So there's a lot of data that you can use and then come up with a prediction. So we can say, let's say a patient walks in and the physician clicks a button inside of EHR. It's called our platform opens up within the EHR. It already pulled all the data from that patient's record that is relevant for that condition. And it walks them through a couple of screens where the physician has to enter data. How does the patient look? Is the patient sweating? Is the patient short of breath? Is the patient, how bad is the pain on a scale of 1 to 10? So the physician has to enter some data. And then in less than 30 seconds, they get the answer. And the answer is, what are the chances of this person having a heart attack in the next 7 days? So it can say, well, 0.3% or 25%. So immediately a light goes on, right? Oh, this patient is high risk. Oh, he didn't look like high risk. He looks very healthy. But based on the past history, based on the presentation, based on all that, the machine is telling us that this person is a high-risk patient. If it is a low-risk patient, well, that's well and good, because then the physician doesn't have to worry too much about that patient. So that's the next step, right? And then the third step is prescriptive analytics. How, based on this risk score, based on these risk factors, what should the physician do? So we give them A, B, and C. You can run this test, wash the patient for another 2 hours and repeat this test. Or we'll say, keep the patient in the hospital, or call the cardiologist, or don't do anything, just send the patient home. So like that, we developed these modules for various disease conditions. So the first one we tested was pediatric head injury, whether to do a CT scan or not. CT scan is bad for children because they are at higher risk for cancer in later life if you keep doing a lot of CTs for these head bumps that they have. So how do you know which kid is at higher risk? where a CT scan is necessary. We did a study on pulmonary embolism, where you have a clot in the lung and sometimes patients die. Well, 95, 96% of these patients were admitted to the hospital. They stay in the hospital for 2 days, and then they go home. Most of them are fine. But how do you identify the patients that are at low risk, where you don't need to put them in the hospital, where you can start them on outpatient treatment? As you know, a hospital admission can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000. So each time the physician makes a decision like that, this tool helps them in the risk assessment and also gives them a prescription, which is send them home or keep them in the hospital or run a test. And so we have built those modules on this platform, and that's my claim to fame. That's how I kind of understood, oh, okay, this is easily doable. And now slowly we started using machine learning, NLP, artificial intelligence is here, as you have seen some of these presentations today. Wow, imagine what you can do with that. A lot of the analytic burden on the physicians will be decreased. Our emergency physicians love this system. You know why? Because they don't have to worry at night if they have sent a patient home or if they unnecessarily admitted the patient and then they do procedures on them, right? Once you admit the patient or once you do testing, there'll be follow-on testing, there'll be follow-on procedures. So there's a long pathway where a lot of unnecessary stuff is done on patients. So the cost comes down. And we've done this as a clinical trial. So 10 facilities had this tool available. The other 11 did not have. And so we studied them for 1 year at more than 1,000 patients in pulmonary embolism. And what we found was that where this tool was available, it doubled the outpatient treatment rates in those 10 facilities, where compared to the controls. And so there's an immediate 500% return on investment within the first year. Imagine what can be done if you implement that kind of a system for other high cost, high risk conditions. So that's how it looks. You get all these data sources, you have an engine, and this engine can be anything. It can be a simple analytic engine. You can put machine learning, AI, and then you create modules. We have different modules for different diseases, and then it goes into the clinical decision support, and which gives the physician immediate feedback at the point of care in real time. So each time they go, as new data enters the system, they get the more accurate risk prediction. And we won an award for this. So Pablo said, computers are useless. They can only give you answers. So who's going to ask the questions? Is it the engineers? Or is it the doctors? So this is a call for all the doctors to learn some data science. They need to understand this science, because this is what is going to change in the next 5-10 years. This is what is coming. Because if you don't know, then you become obsolete. If you understand it, you master it, and then you will be the king. So the bad outcomes will come down because you can predict them. And if you predict them, you can do an intervention. You've seen that sepsis study in the ICU where they used an AI system to intervene, and it had much better outcomes. And the good outcomes will go up. So the medical legal risk actually goes down because you get less bad outcomes. So in the past, it used to be high touch and no tech. Right now, it's low touch and low tech. I think EHRs are pretty dumb. In the future, it's going to be high touch and high tech because machines have to do what they're supposed to do, what they're good at. So we need to punish the machines, not the doctors. I wanted to end with a story. Good, I have some time. There was a small village in, I guess, about 1,000 years ago. And it had a king, and there were farmers living very peacefully, enjoying their lives. You know, they are hard workers, peace-loving people. There was a dragon that lived outside the village. It was a tiny dragon, but it would come into the village at nighttime and eat the chicken. And while eating, it won't just eat the chicken. It is this fire-spitting dragon, right? Stuff catches fire, and then it goes away. And then the farmers wake up, and then their chicken are gone, or things are gone. So they came up with a great idea. They said, "Let's give the dragon the chicken and put it outside the village so that it doesn't have to come inside." So they took their chicken, tied it to a tree right near the swamp where the dragon lives. So the dragon is happy. It doesn't have to go look for the chicken, right? It ate and ate and ate every day. He's getting good meal. And then they ran out of chicken. So they said, okay, let's put our sheep, goats. They ran out of goats. The dragon started becoming bigger and bigger. And then they put cows. They ran out of cows. Well, they're only left with people, and so they decided, we'll give our children to the dragon. And so they would do a lottery and pick a name, and then that kid has to go there. Eventually, they ran out of children. Now, it's the king's turn, because he had a daughter, and it was his daughter's turn to go there because there were no more children. So the king was really sad because he loved his daughter, his only daughter. She's a young preteen. He said, well, if anybody can kill the dragon, I'll give my daughter in marriage and half my kingdom. So one shepherd boy who lives outside of town in a neighboring village, he heard about this and he said, I'll kill the dragon. And so he took a rope. He took the king's daughter. He tied her right there near the swamp. He took another rope, made a noose, and he waited for the dragon to come out because he knows how to handle cattle and sheep, right? So he threw this noose around the dragon's mouth and shut it. And then the dragon cannot spit fire anymore. It can't breathe. And so he dragged it down into the village and he killed it in front of everybody. And the king was happy. He gave his daughter. That's him. His name is Saint George and the dragon. I don't know, you must have heard that story. But the moral of the story is, we all have those tools, the ropes. The technology is here. Let's kill the dragon. That's the name of the book I wrote, Punish the Machine. And it's out there. If you want a copy, I can sign it for you. Or you can buy it on Amazon. And we are on I'm on LinkedIn, InnovatorMD. Questions? Thank you. Okay.
The fundamental flaw I see in the argument is aggregate versus quantity.
Yes.
Study public health and medical school, vaccination and the environment and all these factors. You take cardiac, everyone throws the cardiac heart pain as the cause that we all will challenge. The Birmingham study was just factor analytics to see why affluence causes heart disease. You just take a very narrow point of view, and there's a globe of disease.
Yes.
Bill Gates is trying to destroy malaria in Africa.
Yes.
Just the opposite spectrum. And he's also targeting the same kind of intelligent analytics. Through the mosquito. He's going to take down the mosquito so that it doesn't reproduce. Yeah, but that's the broadest spectrum that you're reading, but you're making it all into one linear data analytic argument. Data. If you garbage in, you garbage out.
But we have enough data now. That's the beauty of today's system, is that we have enough data. The question is, whether you always had the data, but we did not always have the data. That's the difference. Now,
through an individual physician, over the course of 40 years or whatever, you become training for those data points that comes through. But you guys are converting that into a machine, and it's like a black and white. That's the IT 101.
yep. So the answer is, is the machine better than a physician looking at large amounts of data? That's the question.
Is it complement?
Exactly. So there are things that physicians do that they need to do, which is showing empathy, being creative, coming up with solutions which the machine can't come up with, being intuitive, all those things, understanding the patient's situation, the machine can't do. But there are things that machines can do that help the doctors. And that's the argument is, we already have the data, we already have the algorithms. All we need to do is implement them and be able to do better quality of care.
Maybe
Yes.
the title should be partnering with the machine. My question is primary care, smoking. We know that upstream we can prevent a tremendous amount of heart attacks by getting smoking out of people's lives. This doesn't address that. And as a primary care physician, I can talk to my patients, and I do every single visit. But how do we connect, and this is the question, how do we connect back to public health, and where do you see the power there?
So, by the way, there are behavioral health tools that AI can build. It can figure out which patients will respond to which kind of nudging, right? The machine can nudge too. Well, that's what my phone does every time it blinks. So yes, there is technology there, and it's going to get better. But smoking is just one piece. But there's a ton of other things. Okay, which hypertension drug works better in which patient? That kind of data. I would love to have that. When I suggest, okay, this drug is not working, so what is ideal for this kind of patient? That's a simple thing, and you can increase the number of people with controlled blood pressures, and that improves the outcomes. Yes.
So I have a question about the clinical trial you ran, 10 with the AI, 11 without, increase the number of
Outpatient treatment.
outpatient discharges. What was the delta in the, let's say, the analytics diagnostics? What changed the procedures, and were there any adverse events associated with inappropriate discharges versus patients who stayed in? Kind of curious to know,
Yeah.
did it improve outcomes?
Yeah. So before the trial, in the control group, the discharge rate was about 7%. We increased it to 15%. There were no adverse outcomes. There were no readmissions. There were no deaths. And the data is published. By the way, this group, in the last 10 years, we published about 100 papers. So there's a lot of information, new information, that is going to change practice. Yes?
How do you see the EHR, and I guess my question is, I know at Kaiser, Epic and all of their systems, and what sort of hurdles do you think you guys have had to jump through? Do you think Kaiser would ever build its own EHR? What do you think the EHR of your ideal system 20 years from now will look like?
So, great question. How will the EHR look like 20 years from now? So, EHR, as we talked, as I said, it's a very dumb system in the sense that it just collects data. Okay? So when you see a patient, you say, okay, pupils round and reactive, okay, extraocular muscle intact, okay, S1, S2 hurt. How does that affect this condition that the patient is in? How does that affect, we are going with this head-to-toe thing, right? And about half of that is useless. We all know that, but we do it because obviously, people will look at it, how many systems we checked and, how the billing works. So in the future, we're going to only collect data that is going to help us make the right decisions to reach the right outcome. For example, if I'm doing chest pain, okay, I need to know whether there's sweating or not. That's a very important point. Whether the patient has depression or not. That's a very important one. Whether the patient is on steroids or not. So some of the things, like this gentleman said, we are using Framingham data from a long time ago from East Coast. That totally doesn't work in California population right now in 2019. It doesn't work. But what are the patient population specific data points that you need to collect? The EHR doesn't say that, right? It's so dumb because it doesn't know. All you're doing is just dumping some data in there. So a lot of it is useless, but as time goes on, as the machine starts to learn, it'll ask the right questions. And that question will help you navigate this path to better outcomes. And that's the beauty of AI. Yes?
So Dr. Yue, do you foresee the robot doctor in the future that completely will replace like human doctors? Do you foresee?
Well, there are probably 3,000 other medical people working different titles. So doctors are at the top. So first I would expect that it'll replace the receptionist. We'll wait for that to happen. So that's a long way to go. No, I don't think so. Because there are some things human beings do better than machines. There are still some things that humans do better than machines. And that part it cannot take over. Or at least not in the next 50 years, I would say. Yes?
Currently, physicians spend about 25% of their day inside that labor recovery center, and that is driving the burnout. Does your AI system decrease the amount of time that physicians spend inside of that labor recovery system?
So do AI systems improve the time that physicians spend on the EHR systems? So there are two ways of looking at the problem. Number one is, why are we collecting all that data? Okay, so that's a business problem, a business model problem. But yes, there are tools right now being developed that are actually listening to the conversation between the physician and the patient and actually documenting it. So yeah, maybe one of these days we'll get some of those companies to present here. Yes?
Three quick questions, or three quick comments. So, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. First, there's an alternate moral to the story. The alternate moral is the sooner you identify a problem and fix it, the less the solution costs. So if, in fact, the solution that was chosen had been chosen when the chickens were first gone, a whole lot of stuff would have been saved. So I think that's the alternate moral. The second comment, and I think you started to talk about it just a minute ago, which is I've seen patients have almost no symptoms and still have major injuries. I saw a woman who just tripped on a curb and ended up with a ruptured spleen, and you would never have guessed it unless you got the CT scan. And those kinds of outliers
Yeah.
will not show up with AI, right? And so that's part of the reason why physicians will never go where you'll need clinical judgment. A good clinician at the
That's true.
foot of the bed can tell there's a problem even before any conversation is happening.
That's true.
And then third, one of the things you didn't talk about was third-party payment in terms of the challenges in our healthcare system costs and why our health system costs the most in the world, and yet we still have the worst outcomes in the developed nations. So part of that is third-party payment has an impact, and the other piece that goes along with third-party payment is the lack of healthcare transparency. So even if people have high deductibles, and this was talked about in the first presentation,
patients don't have a way to participate in bringing costs down because there's no information for them to make decisions. And so, now a plug. So I started a series on healthcare transparency. And
Yeah, I heard about it.
so if people will go to that and read it and make some comments, I'd appreciate it. You can go to my website, which is clinicalinformatics.com, and on the resources page, there's a whole list of the healthcare transparency links.
Great.
Please take a look. And
Thank you.
continue the
All
conversation.
valid comments. Yes.
So we've sort of skirted around this issue, but talking about clinical intuition, as we're relying more on decision support mechanisms, and I mean, deep learning is better at looking at things, hearing things, all of those sorts of things. Next generation of physicians, how are they actually going to develop this clinical intuition?
Good question. How are next generation, let's say, travel agents doing? How are the next generation taxi drivers going to be?
You're perfectly suited to answer this question. You sort of see an era of deep, intuition. You ushered in AI, and then you also teach. So
Doctors have to learn this. They have to drive it because they have to understand how exactly this works and how they can make it better. So
The next generation of doctors have to know a lot more technology than the current generation of doctors, like me. Yes. So the question is, if you have more data, would it cause more problems? Because, we tend to not, we kind of go with our intuition and then miss some things that may not be there. Well, we have shown that in our studies, actually, the missed diagnosis and the errors come down, actually. Yeah. Are we done?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, guys. I'll be around, so yeah, please come and see me.
Please, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.